I came from a scientific family, oddly enough. My father was a civil engineer, and during the last war, so many years ago now, he built Bailey bridges across the Medway, so that there's no bridge there. He builds the bridge, they take the tanks across, he dismantles the bridge, takes it over, and he had 10,000 men working for him doing that during the course of the last World War. Grandmother said, okay, make sure your children go into the scientific world, do you see? And it really wasn't my line of activity at all. But I was a little bit late in making a decision. My brother followed the mathematical bent that my father had, and he became a chartered accountant, which you've heard all about, with fairly extensive studies. I think he was about 27 before he qualified, but he had to make some intensive studies of the law before he became qualified. And then when I was 13, I decided that I thought music was probably the line of activity that I should follow. So I started playing, didn't get very, very far, and then I went to a concert pianist for lessons, and he said, I think you better start playing in some competitions. So I started playing in competitions, didn't get very far, but after a few years with perseverance, my name started coming up at the top of the list, and I started winning scholarships and all sorts of things. And then I got a place at the Royal College in London and studied there, and then went on to do a second degree in King's College London as well. So that's the background that I followed. It wasn't one, you see, that you say, okay, you've got to follow this plan. Your calling and your career can be different, very, very different, as we pointed out earlier. What I've done over the past few years is I have been involved in teaching, lecturing, writing, journalism, examining, adjudicating, conducting, being a head of department, and composing. And there is a very, very wide selection of things that you can do in the musical world if you just happen to be there at the right time. You don't have to go to university either to do these. Do you know? Do you think of Liverpool and you think of the Cavern Club and you think of the Beatles? They didn't have any qualifications in music. I don't think they had any O-levels even in those days. But they made an incredible name for themselves in the 1960s, just by strumming their guitars. Somebody had a little bit of an ability to write, and they rocked the world. And that happens with such a large number of people in the musical world. You know, you might be strumming away on your guitar in your back garage with some drummer or something, and then somebody hears you, and then you get a break, and it happens. You know, it's nothing you've really worked for, it's just that you are positioned in that place and something happens and you get moved on. What I want to do today is just to show you very, very briefly, if you've got any of these characteristics about you, then perhaps you could move into this situation and you might then benefit from it. Now, for instance, in teaching and lecturing, you have to ask yourself, have I got an ability to convey this material to other people? Can I give them something? Can I make a deposit in their lives of this material? If you've got no means or ability to actually achieve that, then there's no point in walking that avenue. But if you think you have, and you think that there's something inside you that other people would benefit from, then it might be that you might want to go in to the teaching and lecturing. Have you got a desire to sow seed into other people's lives? In other words, you are wanting to perpetuate not who you are, but that deposit that's in you, you want to unload it onto somebody else. And if you've got the ability to speak that into somebody's life as well, then probably teaching and lecturing might well be the area that you could benefit from in society. Can you assess the strategy that's good for other people? In other words, when you see them and you think to yourself, I think it'd be very good if they walked down that one, walked down that avenue, moved in that direction. I think there will be something really rich for them at the end of that avenue. Have you got the ability to assess that kind of strategy that would be good for them and cause them to develop? Then probably teaching is an area where you are quite skilled. Can you manage to look after records? Keep information about people so that you can begin to build up a picture of other people. This is all looking out, you see, all the time, beyond yourself onto somebody else's life. And say, can I hold those records and build up that picture? Some of you homeschoolers, you see, have a difficult situation because your parents really are the only ones that know anything about you. Do you see? But a teacher who walks alongside might be able to say, yes, I could write a very valuable report about this particular person. Do you hold that information? Can you then put it together to make a report that's valuable to other people? Then teaching and lecturing might be very valuable for you. And then, have you got faith for them? Have you got that ability to say, I believe that seed that's been sown will grow like a mustard bush, and it will develop in that person's life, and they will become a person of influence. I will stand on the word and see that come to life in their lives. Then you've probably got some kind of teaching ability about you, which will be very valuable for carrying on things. Because I don't want to train people to become like me, just like my grandmother wanted me to become an image of my father because he was so successful in civil engineering. I don't want to do that for you. What I want to do as a person, as a musician, is to unload onto you my experiences of music so that you can then build on them and become a much greater person than I could ever become. If you've got those sorts of feelings inside you and you feel that you can then help other people, then probably teaching and lecturing is the area that you need to move into. Now, just a little bit about qualifications in music. I'm in a very, very fortunate position as a musician because I do not have to go to any university to get any qualification. All the qualifications that you can, I know I've been there myself and I know what it's like, but you don't have to do that. We did some research in the 90s when we were running Victory College, and we found that London University actually offers all the degrees, umpteen of them. I think there are something like 300 degrees which can be done externally. You don't have to go to the university to do them at all. As long as you can find a teacher that will help you to actually cover the syllabus, as long as you agree with the syllabus, of course, you take the same examination externally that the students who've been there for 3 years or 4 years take internally. So you come out with exactly the same qualification, and you don't have to have the humanistic influence of going to the university in the first place. Now, that also works when it comes to college diplomas as well, because you can take them all externally. You do not need to go to a music college to get a music qualification. As long as you can find a teacher who will teach you, you can do it totally independently and end up with the same qualification that the internal student gets. And that's a wonderful position to be in. Not that you want to be apart from these colleges and universities, but what you want to do is to actually stem the influence that they have upon your Christian upbringing. Writing and journalism, another aspect of music. Just a few things about this one. It would probably be a good idea to have a degree in English if you wish to do this, although I've done that without a degree in English, and I've written for several very, very important magazines and newspapers and that sort of thing, and written articles on concerts and critiques on things. So the big thing about this area of your work is, have you a good flowing writing style? In other words, can you produce things that are gripping, that when people read them, they look at them and they can't put them down? You know, sometimes you might get into a book and you think, God, I've got to get on to the next chapter. I can't wait to see what's going to happen. Do you know? That's a gripping writer. That's a person who's got a style that attracts you. You can't avoid it. It's rather like a moth going around a light bulb. It can't stop itself because the light draws it. And if you've got a good writing style, a good, exciting vocabulary, sensational writing skills, eye-catching ideas, and the ability to draw and attract people with your words, then probably you might find that you're pretty good at writing for journalism. And it could be a musical journal, it could be anything. But those are the things that you're looking for. And to develop those skills, you probably do need some kind of degree in English or an ability to be able to handle the language. I still do A-level marking. And I've been really appalled at the stuff that I have to read that comes to my door. It's quite staggering that people can't put a half a dozen words together when they're aged 18 that make sense. Sometimes I have to read these papers 2 or 3 times before I can actually try to make out what the person's trying to say. It staggers me. But that is the nature of the people of today. It's creativity. As long as you've got the ability to create something, it doesn't matter whether you put it down accurately or inaccurately, as long as you can grasp what's being said. Did you hear the report a few weeks ago? 3 million children coming out of primary schools unable to read and write and have a level of numeracy that is appropriate to their age. That's a staggering set of facts. And if that is then perpetuated through secondary school, it's not surprising that some of the stuff that comes out is causing us to despair at what we're actually seeing. So if you've got any of those skills there, then probably you need to develop those. And you might go for some kind of qualification which will give you that ability to develop those things that you have. As I said, I'm into the examination market at the moment. And if you think that you could go into examination or adjudication, which is a kind of a public examination really more than anything else, then that you probably will need to have these characteristics or qualities. A good assessment of standards, so that you know whether somebody is doing something well or whether they're just faking it. You know, when you go into banking, they show the tellers behind the counter what a good £5 note looks like. They don't show them the fake ones, they show them the good ones. So they'll recognise straight away where something is fake or something is real. There are people, you see, that can play things, perform things in music, but they make a rough idea of what it's like. There might be umpteen wrong notes in it, there could be missing dynamic levels, there could be all sorts of things that will go wrong. And somebody would say, wow, that's wonderful! What you played was absolutely fantastic! Do you know? And then somebody else who knows the piece will come along and say, wow, there was this, there was this, there was this, there was this, and you were only playing the piece at half speed. What's all that about? So if you've got a good assessment of standards, then you probably could go into this particular realm here. You've got to know your subject very well in order to be able to do that. You've got to have plenty of experience in assessment, because it is very, very easy indeed to play at something and not to achieve a good result at the end of it. You can make it feel as though it's successful, when really it's got a few things that need to be improved, and sometimes radically improved. Number 4, what makes a living performance? That's somebody who gets outside of themselves and is then able to say, I'm presenting you a gift. I'm giving it to you because I trust it's going to bless you. If you're in a position where you can assess that that is what's happening, rather than somebody who's perhaps singing, sometimes we see it, and then somebody next door here makes a little mistake, you know, something like that. Their level of activity is here. It's not there. And you just need to be aware of that ability to assess whether somebody is saying, I'm giving you all I've got. I'm leaving nothing for myself. I trust this blesses you. Just think of a nice Christmas present you want to give to somebody. You're going to wrap it up in a bit of old torn newspaper, or you're going to do it in nice paper with a nice bow around so that it looks attractive. What's going to speak to the person who receives it? You see. So that's what makes a living performance, is the ability to give to other people. And when it comes to an examination which is a little bit more private, the ingredients of a satisfying examination are what speaks to a person who really knows the piece and can say, yes, that really was wonderful. So that's the examination and adjudication area. If you're into the business of conducting, leading others, or in a position of being a head of department, and I've been all of those, so I've got some ability to be able to speak of them. First of all, in music, you need to have a good sense of style. Now, as we know, music develops over the years, and you might have a piece of music that comes from 1650, and you've got certain criteria that apply to that type of music. You might have a piece of music that's come from 1999, and there are a different set of criteria that apply to that sort of music. So a good sense of style means that you can assess whether that person is actually playing the piece well. Like, for instance, some people might play some Bach, and they might play Bach on the piano. Okay? Bach hated pianos. He didn't like them at all, didn't like the sound of them. He'd much rather have a clavichord and a harpsichord to play his music. So, well, we have to do in the 20th century, because most people don't have harpsichords in their house, we have to play it on a piano. But then there are criteria about the type of performance that you can actually make concerning Bach, and say, okay, there won't be massive crescendos and decrescendos in his music because he couldn't produce them. So we don't put them in. If you have a look at Bach's music, unedited, not by some chap who publishes it and puts loads of lines on it, you will find that he writes the notes. He doesn't write anything else. He might occasionally put that it's got to be loud, he might occasionally put that it's got to be soft. But he won't do anything else, and he won't have any phrasing marks on it or anything like that. It's straight, because the instruments of his day wouldn't produce that type of thing. So what people do in the 20th century is they romanticise it, and they do what the piano can do, but it's not an authentic performance. So you need a good sense of style. Where does this music come from? What kind of interpretation does it need? You need some very good interpersonal relations, because if you're a conductor and you've got the whole orchestra against you, you've got a problem. You know, if you're a head of department and nobody likes you as a head of department simply because you are awkward in your decisions that you make, or you make them feel uncomfortable. The whole point about the conductor or the head of the department or the leader, there are a few exceptions to this. I'll tell you about one in a minute. You need good interpersonal relations, because as a head of department, you shouldn't be happy until everybody else who's working under you is working to capacity. When everybody under you is working to capacity, then you can begin work on your job, whatever that happens to be. But the basic part of your job is to draw out other people. Now, having said that, of course, I've got to retract my words, because one of my favourite conductors in the 1960s, and I think he spent about 10 or 15 years doing Wagner's Ring Cycle, was George Solti, a Romanian conductor. And you know, the orchestra at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London absolutely hated him. Every one of them. And yet you would go, he somehow had the ability to actually pull off something that you could not believe would happen. I can't help feeling that God actually worked through him somehow. But he was the chief conductor there, and the orchestra hated him because of his rigour, his real determination to have everything right. And then he left, and he went off to become the chief conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And he was still conducting when he was 85. Amazing, quite an amazing man, but he had the ability to make music live with an orchestra that hated him. Quite incredible. There we go. They hated Jesus too, didn't they? But he gave them life. But good interpersonal relations are good. That's the ability to draw out the best in other people. You see, he knew what the best was, and somehow, by real persuasion, he got to the point where he drew it out of them. That's another quality of a conductor or a head of department. You bring out the best. And when everybody working under you is productive to the best that they can be, then you're the most successful in your job. Plan for the best interests of others. Look for what's going to bring life into them. Assess the strategy that they need to walk through in order to be able to get to that position. Manage others, we've mentioned there, to be productive, but set exemplary standards yourself. don't expect other people to do what you won't do. You have to be in a position where you can set the lead for other people to follow you. So, last one, composing. Just supposing you want to be a composer. You have to have a message. You have to have ability and skill. You have to be creative. Now you can be this in your garage or in your workroom. You can have all of these things. You don't have to have massive qualifications to achieve these things. To help you along, you probably need to have a knowledge of other people's work so that you don't actually duplicate what they've already said. You need also to be able to be in a position where you develop the language of music. In other words, you know where it's got to this point, so you add to it, you develop. But if you haven't no knowledge of that, then the chances are you won't be able to graft anything new in yourself. So what develops the language of music? What says something that's not already been said? What will develop your style? Your style is something individual. Vaughan Williams, you see, writes music that's very, very different from Benjamin Britten. Yet 50 years ago, they were both established musicians and British musicians. What makes them different? They have a different idiom that they work on and that they achieve. What's needed at a point in time in order for people to be brought into that position where perhaps they can commune with God? You might be able to write something that people say, God, I experienced God in my life today. Somebody's written this and they've drawn me closer to Him. And commissions. I've had several times when I've been asked to write things. That's something that the society asks you and you write it and you meet that particular criteria. When my middle son was graduating down in Cardiff for his medical degree, well, he took a Bachelor of Nursing actually, and it's interesting for any medics that want to follow this particular one. He was told in his 4th year, because he had an outstanding project, that if he wanted to stay on a couple more years, they would convert his qualification into a doctorate. He didn't like medicine and he didn't want to stay, so he abandoned the idea. But it is an interesting way how you could become a doctor if you want to follow through after what John's been telling you about the medical profession. But he said, I want to do a study on music therapy. And I said, okay, I'm prepared to come down and give you a little bit of a hand, but I don't know very much about music therapy at all. And he came across a story of the man who went around, didn't offer any physical things to people in the way of therapy, but he recommended a recipe of playing music. And he had some remarkable healings as a result of just simply playing music. One day on his rounds, he had an absolutely horrific car crash. And he had to go into hospital, obviously. They rushed him there, and he was put on a life support machine. And they said, if he gets through this, he'll be a cabbage for the rest of his life. They got to the point where they said, they called his wife in and they said, we'll turn off the life support machine today because there's no sense of recovery for him at all. She said, "Don't do that. Give him some of his own medicine." They said, "Well, all right then, if that's what you feel. But there's no hope for him. He's not going to get any better." So she said, "Play this music 24 hours a day by his bed." Reluctantly, they got some music and they played it. Within a week, his eyes started twitching. Within 3 weeks, he was walking around the hospital. Within 6 weeks, he was out on his rounds again.